Down in NOLA. Didn't expect that to be as loud as it was. Don't come down here. Okay. The very first album. Well, the first album, literally, they may as well have just called the project. I think they kind of were trying to do a one-off and see where it went, given the choice of album title is literally a phrase. And I think that started to slightly become a thing up to a point, given down to a bustle in your hedgerow. Sounds like it could be a phrase as well in a different way. And of course, down 3, if you take the 3 out, it's literally just down over the under. They, in a weird way, it took me a while to realize that once, especially maybe like a few weeks ago, actually, when I was thinking of doing this album review. This is the debut, the 95, I believe. Yeah, let's look at this. Yes, 95. Here on Electric Records. Co-produced between both the band, Dev Down, and Matt Thomas. This was this early on days of this band had a hype going into it before anyone even knew who was involved in this project, and it would turn out to be essentially this metal supergroup that would be formed by 2 people who became big in being involved as members of other bands, even though they weren't original members of those bands, but they played a part in those bands becoming a big deal around the 90s. That being Phil Anselmo, oh, you dumb motherfucker. Why are you forgetting what's his face? God damn it, I hate when I do that. Especially since I am a COC fan, it should come up in my head immediately. God damn it, T-Man, you dumb motherfucker. We're doing it. We're doing it that way. Pepper Keenan. God damn it. I feel bad because I did review the Corrosion of Conformity record last like a year or 2 ago, which was fine. It was definitely among the better albums they've had, that's for sure. And it makes me even sadder, given that we're never going to get to see that lineup together ever again, given the drummer's Reed Mullins, I believe is Reed Mullen, and his passing. Oh well, at least those who enjoyed more of the original lineup the original lineup when it came to the Eye for an Eye and Animosity era of them, though not exactly getting what you wanted, since it was essentially them kind of doing continuing on from whatever Pepper Keenan was doing when it wound up becoming his project, and then they reunited that what would have been the Deliverance lineup, honestly my favorite lineup with that group, but regardless, of course this doesn't Corrosion for me, it's just more that I went on my rant and tangent. Forgive me, but for those who didn't already know from my tangent in the COC review, I might leave a link for that one in here, but NOLA, dude, this album should have been my first from this band. Not gonna lie, my first exposure, believe it or not, was the music video back when for Headbangers Ball 2, which was the video for On March the Saints, and I'm like, because I was already by that point into Pantera. I didn't know about these other band members, and then I looked them up, and then I started getting into Corrosion Conformity that way, actually, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm glad I listened to Deliverance. I wound up downloading some stuff, a couple songs here and there, and eventually decided to get the whole Deliverance album. I loved it. I eventually realized as I went through that all their 90s stuff is to me literally their best. Their 80s stuff in the full original lineup, which is why I think I prefer the Deliverance lineup, because you get the original core foundation of what was of the band, but you get what was already working with Pepper Keenan involvement within the lineup and getting and that's why I think Deliverance works as well as it does. Personally, even though I understand people who will argue and go to bat for Blind, but anyways, we're talking down. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's already been almost 5.5 minutes now, and this honestly should have been my first. But I feel like with this, and now having listened to two, the pieces come together for Down Over the Under for me a lot, even better. Though, and I still liked that record when I heard it and bought it. But it doesn't hit in the same way Down did here. And I think there's like a reissued version because from Down 2 onward, Rex Brownmont have joined the band instead of Todd something. Todd Strange, I think it was his name. I believe. But this album was their first. The plan with this album, and the core power of that is Kirk Weinstein, is the rigs of Kirk Weinstein and Pepper Keenan. And it seems both of them coming off of whatever albums they were doing on their separate projects, everyone basically burned it together and kind of sort of basically, though in their own creative way, though still inherently on the surface, kind of a very slowed down Pantera. And Weinstein played that part in it, given that he's literally using what may as well be using, even though it's using a metal zone in the clean channel of said amp that is essentially Dimebag's signature of the RG, I believe it's the Randall RG100. I have a RP1000 here that has supposedly that signature amp in here, but that's the actual amp's main core dirty channel, or at least it's more high gain channel, as opposed to, the clean, to a clean channel and just run the metal zone, which good luck doing that even with this RP1000. You miss you won't be able to use the mid frequencies unless you have an X edit, and I don't because I bought this thing used. But anyways, and I don't exactly have the guitars they were using. I could come close in tone if I wanted to, but the thing is I'm not going to be able to do that right now because somebody's sleeping, and I was just surprised I was able to get away with doing things with this one. And what you heard is, of course, the way you should probably first hear this, because even though Stone the Crow was a great choice of single, in the least to show that there's more to this band than being a Pantera ripoff. Being a slower version of Pantera. Or more closer to more trad doom lenient version of Pantera, essentially. And somehow they do somewhat fit into groove metal. Or at least they're able to, at their faster moments, come closer to mid-tempo groove, something close to mid-tempo groove thrash, but not really quite thrashy, or at least have a groovy mid-tempo syncopated mid-tempo riffage that comes close to thrashy, but not really. It's still quite, or at least it's punky. It's more hardcore oriented enough, because that's a lot of the core sludge. Even I think Phil Anselmo has at one point considerably cited the earliest and most likely root of what is all of sludge, and yet alone grunge in of itself, is the Melvin's Gloomy Porch Treatments, which is a pretty solid, for what it is pretty solid, and you understand how Nirvana, where a lot of, not only just sludge metal in general, but a lot of Nirvana was with that band. And I know I'm ranting, I'm sorry. But Down, this band has been amazing, has been pretty amazing up to a point. I am a little, and it was mostly just Phil and Pepper getting together. They wanted to do their own thing, because away from their bands and have it actually legitimately be their own band, or at least to them, because they started it themselves as the main foundation. just jamming together. I guess COC and essentially Pantera were touring together. COC more likely opening for Pantera, given how huge Pantera technically was at that point in the 90s and within the metal scene, even within not only the underground, but eventually the mainstream slowly but surely accepting them, even during a time, even at a point. And what helped, I think, around that time frame is, given grunge and everything, sludge and stoner metal were essentially these genres, and given some stoner rock here and there, or with the more metal equivalent of that to what is. It's essentially a lot of it being down in the southeastern states of New Orleans, more southern oriented, but most of its origins does come sort of in what would become of the Seattle sound, which did when it's the mainstream become a little bit more polished, but not quite. But very 70s production way, and so on and so forth. And you do see a little bit of, and that a lot of that production that was starting to go on a lot in the 90s did effectively help bands like, and what Pantera already set the groundwork for in their production, did play a part in how Downs would come across. And I think after this album, that's why Bustle Down to Bustle in Your Hedgerow sounds like it does, because but I think it also has something to do with what the band members and their separate projects, whether it be Kirk Weinstein's work with Crowbar, what was going on at COC, what Pepper was going to do with COC post Deliverance. A lot of this was, and I believe, a big muff into a Gibson SG that has humbuckers in it, and I don't think P90s, but not P90s. And into, I think it might have been an orange amp and cab. But either one of them way, they wound up mostly going, I guess, through a Marshall cab that might have had both a mix, had one or the two, or a mix between, more likely a mix between V30s and vintage 30s, Celestian vintage 30s, and maybe some Celestian greenbacks to get the tones that they were able to do. Or at least what they were going for, which was clearly the Black Sabbath meets St. Vitus. Kirk Weinstein providing the St. Vitus tone, more St. Vitus oriented tone, and Pepper providing the more Black Sabbath elements. And that's mostly the core tone throughout a lot of it. The moments where they clean up a little bit and they go a little more bluesy, or just rely a little bit on dirt and don't fully go high gain, like as Stone the Crow would say. And even there are moments where they do get ambiance, see a little bit with certain tracks. Temptations Wings is a great starter. You're already into it. You know what you're getting yourself into by that point. And when Lifer happens, Pillars of Eternity is pretty good. I think Rehab is one of the more raunchier, nastier sounding tracks that can be a lot harder to digest, but I think it does enough to break a little bit of monotony. And Hail the Leaf is pretty good. Underneath Everything was also pretty good as well. There's so many good, catchy enough riffs. Even with the choice of tone, they somehow managed to make it work and not feel monotonous in its points. And Eyes of the South is probably one of the best and most ZZ Top intros, or at least even more so than what was probably hinted at in certain points in Deliverance. And it's single-handed one of the best bluesier intros to get you into it before they start hammering those heavy high gain riffs of chugs of before really breaking it down and stuff. Most of this being a lot of it dealing with its own cynicism. And the band, basically, aside from being sludge metal itself, they kind of adapted elements of your southern rock, your more aspects from your southern, some elements that were of the groove metal scene that Pantera helped launch, that helped launch through Pantera, at least in terms of some of the more groove syncopated elements of their riffage were pretty much there, and I think that's why this album hits so well, because they found that perfect balance of that, what Pantera was doing with that mid-tempo group, with those mid-tempo grooves of thrash, but not being without being thrashy. Because there were moments where they did soften up and try to, with Pantera, where they wouldn't straight up get thrashy. They just found this weird mix between the two, and somehow they can reach that point, but they still somehow make it pretty clear their riffs are very much more sludgy, has some more of the hard psychedelic aspects of stoner rock or stoner metal in general, than adding all these other more ambience ideas here and there that were kind of reminiscent of what you get out of something like Planet Caravan, but which, not that the band didn't explore literally within the same, literally a year that Pantera would explore with their cover, which is the utmost perfection of that version of that track. And then just Eyes of the South is, I think, is very descriptive of that certain mentality. Most of it being a lot of, references, a lot of weed references and stuff. The biggest and best one being the single that closes this album, which we'll get to in a minute. Jail's pretty good, but Losing All is one of the better tracks that'll really hooks you the most. Stone the Crow is great. Pray for the Locust, I think, is one of the instrumentals. I think Underneath Everything might have been one of the other softer instrumental stuff. Or at least it was me. It might have been Hail the Leaf. I'm trying to remember. But I do remember Pray for the Locust being one of them. And then it led to Swan Song, which is definitely another great one. Just, Bury Me in Smoke is one of the chuggier riffs. And one I would totally hear and listen to. And totally see being used as a freaking... It's clearly obviously Bury Me in Smoke is like just that riff is just, that just chugs the whole thing. And kind of the way they end that record, it's like it kind of false ends with a fade out and then fades back in, keeps going before it decides to fade back out again. Or it just fades back out again, like with an extra little build up. That before it fades out completely. Like back into, or at least it goes into the fog of smoke. That comes out like, "Bookie, man, bookie." It just gets it's heavier, and then it's like, oh, and the fog comes back in or something. That's what I feel like is going on with that. But I could see that being like for the Mortal Kombat character Smoke. Like a montage for that character throughout the years, and like it literally lining up with the character select screen when you hit him, and that's literally what I hear when I hear you in the background, Smoke, from freaking Phil, which he sometimes does contribute on guitar apparently as well, in some way. Not sure what he chose to use or if he just wound up at points borrowing. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he wound up doing the same exact. Either he took elements of, maybe he might have took elements from both Pepper and Kirk's ideas, but it's more than like, given who we know he knows. And I'm not sure at that time. I guess at that time were almost about to be on edge, Pantera, but I think, or at least Phil with the Abbott brothers, we're going to be on it. Eventually get to that point, because the later albums, even though luckily Southern Treadkill was a better record, but was as good a record as it was, the last record has the moments, and I'm starting to wonder if the Terry Date mix might have been a better realization. Or at least a way to make it work for more modern times and still be something that band could get into. But Eyes of the South, let's see. I never truly got to deep dive into these lyrics, but I kind of had a feeling what Temptation Dwayne's is either was on how he can't shake. I mean, the sports pleasure, no facts behind these eyes. This pain I've come to treasure, being down has become my life. I my head with frustration. Look at others and wonder why I'm feeding my cancer, a broken vision that's my life to reason, so now I'm watching my life go. Well, it's falling apart. I can't shake Temptation's wings. Of course, most of this I don't think is all the band's lyrics. I think it's just certain moments in there. And most of this was made in 93, apparently, so. Yeah, like, Phil always had these sort of cynical but socio-political kind of things going on with him, and obviously some are more obviously about You'll regret the rules I broke. When I die, bury me in smoke. Just like they just kind of give little tidbits of lyrics. They don't give you the full ones. I forgot about that. But regardless, I mean, bury me in smoke is pretty good. It's a pretty good way, and you almost may as well be about what how he basically his will testament that he would rather die high and hire some shit. Which, I mean, it just goes to show he met, like, a lot of the issues he's had in between both drug and alcoholism that eventually did kind of lead to. And in fact, I feel like Eyes of the South, I don't know if that was intended, but it is. It's more about about what is Southern pride, and how and if or and I guess maybe there's something involving the mentality he has here that could have potentially been what led to the sort of systemic racism that is in the South. The South, even though technically that's kind of here nor there with me, since by technicality, where I'm living at in Missouri, which was a bi-state, has been pretty much a swing state since the Civil War, or at least a bi-state. The southern Missouri area was legitimately part of the South, so I guess you could say I'm bringing this for a Catholic bringing unintentionally a sense of devil sympathy about this, but which I'm not even bothering to get into because of certain sects of people, but that's neither here nor there with that. All you need to know, I love the fuck out of this thing, which I should have just said immediately off the bat. And I think I have yet to hear the version that they wound up redoing with Rex, because I'm fine with what Strange brought on this record. He was the one that would leave before Rex would show up for a while, and then I think after 3, things started to go to shit. And a lot of core key members that helped in the band, it basically led to being pretty much Pepper, all the things that were making this metal supergroup super started to kind of dim down a bit. Rex would leave, all these other groups would leave, and people that weren't exactly in the stylish genre that the band was more known for, they would not bring in something, they wouldn't really bring anything to the table, and if they did, it just didn't work out in the band's favor. You know, there was more the fact I think they just couldn't shake both of them couldn't shake the fact of what they wore from their former bands. And when they tried to do it, it just didn't come off as well. Not that Down 2 didn't show that they could and sort of pull it off, and not that Down 3 didn't find a way to balance out between those two aspects of their career. But it's when they started to really try, like, suck out a lot of what was good about them, that I think Down 4 kind of suffers from it, man. I don't get me wrong. I like the later albums, but they just never could beat what that record was. They did say this one was a little bluesier, and the moments when they do show that, they show that. Not to mention that of a weird moment that's very Clutch-esque on that record, but and yeah, this was my first. But yeah, there were moments on these records that are fine, but I do think the band just kind of literally went down in like unfortunately in the worst possible ways as opposed to the best. And eventually the band just hasn't really gotten back together. The fact that they had to resort in Down 4 being split into 2 EPs instead of being a full-length record was kind of sad to see, plus especially given the lineup changes even more so around that time frame. Oh, jeez. I mean, the albums were fine. I liked them, but they just felt disappointing every time in comparison. But I would have moments that would do enough with at least when they were doing full-length records, and then just, I don't know. Regardless, Down in NOLA is still a classic album worth checking out. If for some reason you do like what Pantera did and you like the bands that are mentioned in here as in other than Pantera, which would be Corrosion Conformity and Crowbar primarily, some members of I Hate God essentially as well, you definitely would like what this album is definitely something worth that album is something worth checking out. What did you guys think of my long-winded review of Down's NOLA? Leave a comment below, let me know. As always, guys, keep it random, keep it real, keep it rocking. I'll see y'all in the next video. Take care, y'all.